Walter Greene was an old black man who sacrificed everything to raise two abandoned children he found in an alley. Decades later, his cruel boss framed him for a crime, and the courtroom turned against him, whispers calling him a thief, a liar, a man unworthy of mercy. With his hands cuffed and hope fading, the judge prepared to deliver a life sentence. But just as the gavel was about to fall, two figures stepped forward, and what they revealed shook the entire room. Before we go any further, if this is your first time watching one of our videos, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us bring you even more powerful stories. Stick with us till the very end. And if this story moves you, drop your thoughts in the comments and share it with a friend. Now let's begin. The winter that year was the kind that bit through old coats and worn shoes. Streets in small industrial towns smelled of smoke and cold steel. The kind of place where people rushed home, heads down, ignoring whoever was left behind. At the end of a long shift, Walter Greene, a tired black man in his late 50s, walked with a limp that never healed from years in factory work. His boss always said he was too slow, too useless, a man lucky to even keep a job. Yet Walter never argued. He swallowed the insults, carried his aches, and kept his head low. That night, he passed a narrow alley behind the diner. The hum of the freezer fans mixed with the whistling wind. And there, tucked against the dumpster, were two children, pale, shivering, their clothes nothing more than rags layered on bones. The boy's arm was wrapped around his younger sister, trying to shield her from the cold. Walter stopped. He could have kept walking, the way everyone else did. His boss's words still rang in his head. Don't waste time on strays. You can barely feed yourself. And he was right. Walter's meals were usually scraps, his room barely warm. But watching those kids, he felt a pull stronger than his hunger. He crouched, knees creaking, and the children looked up with eyes too old for their age. "You two got anywhere to go?" he asked softly. Silence, just a shake of the head. Walter exhaled, his breath fogging in the air. He knew what it meant to be discarded, to be invisible, and he couldn't leave them there. Not tonight. He reached out a calloused hand. "Come on," he said, his voice low, steady. The boy hesitated, but the girl's tiny fingers slipped into his palm, ice cold. That was enough. By the time they reached a small apartment, neighbors peeked through cracked doors. "That fool," one muttered under his breath to another. "Old man can't pay his own bills. Now he's dragging strays inside." The other chuckled, shaking her head. "He'll sink with them." Walter heard. He always heard. But he just kept walking, two fragile lives following behind him. Inside, his place was no palace, just peeling wallpaper, a sagging couch, and a single heater that rattled louder than it warmed. Still, he laid blankets across the couch, warmed some broth, and watched as the children ate like they hadn't touched food in days. That night, as he sat in the corner, rubbing his aching leg, Walter thought about how tomorrow his boss would mock him again, how money would stretch thinner than ever. But he also knew this. Those kids wouldn't be sleeping on frozen concrete anymore. Not as long as he was alive. And with that quiet decision, a bond was sealed, one that would echo far louder than he ever imagined. The days that followed were not easy. Walter worked at the steel factory where the air smelled of burnt iron, where every clang of machinery seemed to shake his bones. His boss, Mr. Harlan, was a man who thrived on humiliation. He'd wait until the floor went quiet before barking across the hall. "Greene, even those orphans you dragged home probably move faster than you." The workers laughed, some uncomfortably, others eager to join in. Walter never snapped back. He just wiped the sweat from his brow and kept pushing. But every insult, every glare, was a weight he carried home with his limp. At night, though, the weight seemed to lift. He'd open the door to his apartment, and the children would run to him. The boy, Eli, always with a book in his hand, eager to read out loud what he learned at school. His younger sister, Grace, often sat at the wobbly table, scribbling with a dull pencil, drawing pictures of houses that looked warmer and brighter than anything they'd ever known. Walter gave them as food when cupboards ran thin. He patched Eli's jacket with clumsy stitches and saved coins for Grace's shoes. Some nights, when the heater coughed and died, he huddled them close, pretending he wasn't cold himself. The neighbors gossiped. In stairwells and corner shops, whispers flew. "He'll end up on the street with them," one woman muttered as Walter passed. Another man smirked. "A black man raising 2 white kids? They'll turn on him the first chance they get." Walter heard, but he never answered. Instead, he poured himself into the children. He taught Eli how to change a tire, how to shake a hand with dignity. He showed Grace how to balance coins, how to stand tall even when the world tried to shrink you. Still, Harlan never let him forget his place. When Walter once asked for a day off to take Grace to the clinic, Harlan sneered, "You're not their father. Stop playing hero and get back to work." But Walter did it anyway. He took the day, risking his wages. He walked Grace to the clinic with his hand firm on hers, knowing full well the cost. That night, when Harlan cut his pay in half, Walter hid the slip in his pocket, pretending nothing had changed. Years passed this way. Sacrifice layered on sacrifice. The children grew. Eli, with sharp eyes and a sharper mind, earned scholarships Harlan said he'd never deserve. Grace, once the quiet girl with pencils, grew into a fierce voice in school debates, unafraid to challenge anyone who mocked her strange little family. Walter watched with quiet pride. His limb grew heavier. His back bent more each year, but the kid stood taller. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe. Maybe kindness wasn't wasted. Maybe it was planting something that would bloom far beyond him. What he didn't know was how closely Harlan had been watching too, and how bitter the man had grown seeing Walter build a family from scraps. By the time Eli and Grace had gone off to college, Walter's body carried decades of labor. His hands were rough stone, his back bent, his steps slower than ever. But his heart swelled with pride each time a letter arrived. Eli studying law, Grace chasing journalism. He pinned their notes on the peeling wall like treasures. Mr. Harlan, however, hadn't softened. If anything, the years had sharpened his spite. He hated the sight of Walter walking with his head just a little higher. Hated hearing whispers about the orphans making something of themselves. To Harlan, it was proof that Walter had stolen dignity he didn't deserve. One autumn morning, the trap was sprung. Walter came home to find 2 policemen waiting by his door, their uniforms crisp, their expressions cold. A neighbor watched from her window, muttering, "Told you so. Always knew he'd end up in trouble." The officers shoved past Walter, tearing through his modest apartment. From under the couch cushion, they pulled a small bag stuffed with cash and company equipment stamped with factory labels. Walter's breath caught. He'd never seen it before. Within hours, he was in handcuffs, the metal biting into his wrists. Harlan stood outside the factory gates, arms folded, smirking as Walter was led away. "Guess kindness doesn't pay after all." He sneered loud enough for workers to hear. A few laughed, others just turned away. The courtroom smelled of varnish and dust. Walter sat hunched, his once strong shoulders sagging. Prosecutors painted him as a bitter old man who'd stolen to survive. Witnesses, workers Harlan had quietly paid off, claimed they'd seen Walter sneaking around the storage rooms. Bystanders filled the benches, whispering, "I knew he was too good to be true. Bet those kids he raised don't even know who he really is." Walter said little. He wanted to scream, but years of swallowing insults had trained him into silence. He thought of Eli and Grace, but he couldn't drag them into this shame. Better they stay away. Better they never see him like this. When the judge's gavel struck, announcing that Walter faced a possible life sentence, the room seemed to close in on itself. The walls pressed tight, the air grew thin. Walter's eyes dropped to the floor, his heart heavy with the final truth. Maybe Harlan was right. Maybe a man like him was never meant to rise above his place. And then, the doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open. Two figures stepped inside, confident, unshaken, eyes fixed on a man sitting alone at the defendant's table. Eli, Grace, not the children he once carried home shivering, but adults now, shaped by the very sacrifices he thought had gone unnoticed. The room stirred. Whispers turned into gasps. Harlan's smirk faltered for the first time. Walter's chest tightened. He hadn't wanted them here. But as Eli set down a stack of legal files, and Grace lifted a recorder, scanning the faces in the gallery, he realized something he'd never let himself believe. His kindness had come full circle, and the battle wasn't over yet. The courtroom was buzzing now, restless as Eli straightened his tie and stepped forward. Gone was the timid boy who once hid in alleys. He stood tall, voice steady, introducing himself as Walter's defense attorney. Papers slammed onto the table, files thick with evidence. Grace positioned herself in the gallery, recorder flashing red. She wasn't there just to watch. She was documenting everything. Her articles had already rattled powerful names, and now her pen was aimed squarely at Harlan. The prosecution tried to keep momentum, but Eli cut through their case piece by piece. Witnesses who claimed they saw Walter Steele faltered under his questions. One stammered, admitting he'd only heard rumors. Another contradicted his own testimony when pressed. Eli exposed the cracks like a surgeon opening wounds. And then came the bombshell. Grace rose, requesting permission to share a report. It detailed Harlan's history of wage theft, harassment, and falsified accounts at the factory, backed by documents she'd unearthed as a journalist. Murmurs swept the room. Harlan's face flushed red, his fists clenching white. Walter sat frozen, blinking against the sting in his eyes. He had thought the children he saved had outgrown him, moved on into brighter worlds. But here they were, fighting with fire he had unknowingly passed down to them. The judge leaned back, tapping a pen, weighing the storm unraveling in front of him. "It seems," he finally said, voice echoing. This entire case was built on manipulation. He looked at Walter, then at Harlan. "The charges are dismissed." Gasps. Applause. A few jeers aimed at Harlan as he stormed out, defeated. Eli placed a hand on Walter's shoulder. Grace moved beside him, whispering, "You don't have to carry it alone anymore, Dad." That single word, Dad, echoed louder than the gavel that had freed him. Neighbors who once mocked fell silent. Reporters scribbled furiously. And Walter, old and weary, finally allowed his back to straighten, his eyes to meet the world. He had once lifted 2 children out of the cold. 20 years later, they had lifted him out of a cage. Because kindness doesn't die. It waits, it grows, and when the time is right, it saves. When Walter chose kindness decades ago, he never imagined it would one day save his life. This story reminds us, every act of compassion plants a seed that might return when we need it most. If you want more powerful stories of justice, sacrifice, and redemption, don't forget to subscribe and click on the next video. You won't want to miss what happens there.